Go for Noreen Gosch.
Okay. Before September 5th, 1982, I was a homemaker, housewife, mother. I lived what I've considered to be a normal, happy life, doing things with my kids, going to ball games, baking cookies, doing all the mom things. And then on September 5th, my entire world blew apart when someone kidnapped my son, Johnny, while he was delivering his Sunday morning papers in West Des Moines, Iowa. That morning started out very early for him, like any other day. He left the house at about 5:45 in the morning. He headed down the street pulling his little wagon and our dog riding along with him. He got as far as the corner, about a block from our home, when a man stopped him and asked for directions. Johnny was always instructed not to talk to strangers, so he didn't go over to the car and spend time. The other kids at the corner, who were the witnesses, were the ones that reported all of this to me. As Johnny walked away from this man, the man suddenly made a U-turn in the middle of the street with his car and sped back up the street and pulled in right where all the boys were gathering their papers, folding them, and preparing to deliver their own routes. The man shut off the engine to the car, opened the passenger door, and slid his feet out onto the curb and started talking to all the boys. He spoke with a very slurred speech pattern, according to what I was told by the witnesses. Johnny turned to one of the witnesses, Mike, who was 16, and he said, "This man is nuts. There's something wrong with him. I'm scared and I'm leaving." Johnny threw all his papers into the wagon and took off down the street. The other boys that were at the corner at that time also left. There was a 44-year-old attorney that had pulled up with his car to grab his son's papers. And he had paid attention to the man and the license plate, but didn't know that a crime was about to occur, and he left. Johnny, as he was walking down the street, was just minding his own business when Mike heard our little dog growl. At that very moment, the man who had driven up in the car suddenly pulled himself back in the car, slammed the door, started the engine, and then reached up with his hand and clicked the dome light 3 times. At that very moment, Mike looked down the street after Johnny, saw Johnny walking along, and then saw another man come out between 2 houses and follow my son. The man was about 6'3" and stayed about a half a block behind Johnny. I doubt very much that my son even knew he was being followed. He then went around the corner, out of the direct eyesight of Mike. A few seconds later, Mike heard a car door slam, the screeching of tires, and he saw that very same car that had been at the corner where he was sitting earlier run the stop sign, turn left, which was north, and head straight towards the interstate, which is out of town. This all took place in approximately 12 minutes from the time my son left home. At the time, we were asleep. His father and I were home asleep. We did not know our son was kidnapped. Normally, the routine would have been for Johnny to come in and wake up his father to go with him on the paper route. That morning, for some reason that I do not know today, Johnny did not come in and get his dad. He went on the route alone. That was the only morning in over 13 months of him having the route that he ever did the paper route alone. His dad had always been with him. Our nightmare just exploded. The phone began to ring. Neighbors didn't get their papers. Johnny's father, said, "I'll go and help him. He must be just running late." He left the house, came roaring back in the driveway a few minutes later and said, "Call the police immediately. Johnny's gone. Somebody took him." His wagon was sitting up on the street corner, full of papers. Not even the bundle ties had been cut. I called the police and reported that we had a missing child. It took them 45 minutes before they ever showed up at our home. In that 45 minutes, I got busy on the phone and I called for my other two children to come home. One was working at a pancake house. The other was at college in a nearby town. And I knew that it was serious. I knew we had to gather our family together. I called friends all around town, asking them to begin to search for my son. I called the Des Moines Register district manager for our area, Johnny's direct superior. She came over to the house and brought the names of all the boys and everyone that would have been at that paper drop site that morning. I called every one of them. By the time the police got to my home, I had a full description of the man, I had a description of the car, a partial license plate number, and every detail that every witness could remember. When the police got there, I filled out the missing persons report and signed it, and the cop looked at me and said, "Did your son ever run away before?" And I said, "He's never run away, period. Why would you say such a thing? Didn't you just listen to me when I told you what the witnesses had said?" And he became a little disgruntled, the fact that I would even utter a question or a statement like that. And he said he had to go back to the station. He left our home, and it was now about 8:30 in the morning. We did not see another representative of the police department until 3 in the afternoon. We were on our own. We organized search parties. We had contacted the media. We asked for help from the public. Thousands of people came forward in West Des Moines and formed search parties and searched the state parks, searched cornfields, searched everything around the area where one might think a violent crime could have occurred and perhaps a body might have been dumped if Johnny had been murdered. At one point, 20 of the searchers came back to the house, furious, angry. They came to the door and said, "I thought you wanted help." And I said, "I do want help. What's wrong?" And they told me that our police chief showed up at one of the state parks, drunk, got up on top of a picnic table, and shouted through a bullhorn, a loudspeaker, for everyone to go home because Johnny Gosch was nothing but a damn runaway. That police chief is no longer in office. His name was Orville Cooney, and he was shamed and had to leave office and was later arrested for shoplifting. So his character was not anything of a sterling nature to begin with. But that was the first big red flag that took place on our case. The fact that the police weren't going to look. We were on our own. At that point, I thought, well, the FBI is supposed to come in on the case. They always did on the FBI story with that from Jim Zimbalist Jr. So I called the FBI office. They did send 2 agents to my home. They sat at the table slurping down coffee and explained to me that they would not enter the case because basically they had no crime. And I looked at them and said, "I have no son. What are you going to do about it?" And they said the police chief had told them that this case did not require the FBI and they were not to be in the case. Day turned into night and into the next day and into the next night with nothing but confusion and absolute turmoil. Our phone rang every 15 minutes, day and night. We had tremendous press coverage. All of the local stations began to show Johnny's picture, and the news began to spread throughout Iowa and to other states that a young boy had been ripped off the street. Still, the police were still waiting 72 hours to act. And I can remember walking into the police station and asking the police chief, that if there had been a bank robbery, would they have called it runaway money for the first 72 hours? Or would they have begun to work on it? Well, he didn't have an answer for me, but did ask me to leave the station. At that point, I knew that no matter what we did, it would have to be our own efforts to find our son, that we were not going to get the help from the police. So I began doing a thorough search, calling people, asking for recommendations for a private investigator. I got several names, and within a week or two, I was already out interviewing private investigators to take the case. One man did agree to take the case, and we brought him to Des Moines and began to do the preliminary things to start an investigation for a missing child. The second day that the man was on the job, he was going to set a surveillance at the site where Johnny was kidnapped at the same time of the morning to watch local traffic and cars. 2 squad cars pulled up from the West Des Moines Police Department and arrested my private investigator and tried to charge him with vagrancy for just sitting there. I could see that they weren't going to accept the idea of a private investigator on the case either. So I went to the police chief and I said, if you're not going to work on my son's case, that's your choice. But step aside because I am. And I informed him that I did not want to see or hear again that my private investigators would be disturbed or arrested. They were licensed in Iowa to operate, and he had fair warning to back off if he was not going to do the job. He decided to back off. He didn't do the job either, but I had good investigators, and we began to gather information. One very important piece of information that we did get came from an interview. The private investigator brought in associates from his office, spread them out in a radius from our home, and they did house-to-house interviews. During one of the interviews, one of the neighbors told him that he had seen a van parked the wrong direction on the street with the motor running, and it was a loud engine. So it caught his attention, and he watched for a little while out the window, and he saw a car pull up next to the van and saw that 2 men were loading something long wrapped in a blanket from the car to the van, and then they all jumped into their vehicles and drove away. He thought it was odd at the time, but at the time he did not know a kidnapping had just happened a few blocks away. We kept that information. We did not share it with law enforcement. And I did that for a reason. Because I knew that someday somebody was going to come forward with that piece of information. And if it had not been broadcast through the media, in newspapers, magazines, or any other way, then I would know that that person was telling the truth. It took many years of leads, disappointments, things that we thought would pan out to be the culmination of the case, that we would get our son back, only to be disappointed. It was like a roller coaster. It took 9 long years, and finally, one day, a young man who had been through torturous hell, who had been abused sexually, had been part of a pornography and prostitution ring, was accused of perjury and sex crimes, was sitting in jail. He confided to his attorney, John DeCamp, from Lincoln, Nebraska, that he had taken part in the Johnny Gosch kidnapping. John DeCamp thought, whoa, that's a big case. I better notify the parents. So he called our home, and I happened to be away that night. I was working, and my husband, at the time, my ex-husband, took the call. He went to Omaha, Nebraska to visit with John DeCamp and to meet Paul Benassi. He, however, did not tell me, and I did not learn about the existence of Paul Benassi for another 2 years. He kept it completely quiet. When I did find out about Paul and had the opportunity to hear his statement and to read the diaries that he had kept, logging all of his experiences, including the kidnapping of my son, Paul made mention of the fact that they had a van parked a couple of blocks from the kidnapping site, and that van was used to transport Johnny's body to a location in the state of Iowa, and that the body had been transferred from one car to this van, and that is the piece of information that the neighbor had seen and shared with our detectives. And I knew then at that time that Paul Benassi was telling the truth, because that piece of information had never been repeated, had never been shared with anyone. It was kept in our files for our own information only. And what transpired from that situation, when I was finally told that Paul Benassi existed, it was my shock that no one believed him. I went to our police department. I went to our FBI. They said he was a nut. They said he was not credible. They said that he had multiple personalities due to the programming, mental programming, and the abuse that he was put through or claimed to have been put through, and that not one word of his statement could be taken as fact. I had not ever met John DeCamp until many years later, but during the time that Paul Benassi was being disputed constantly, he never wavered from his story. What he said about Johnny's kidnapping verbatim remained the same after 11 long years. The kid was not lying. A lot of times when people manufacture things, they do not remember what they said to whom, so they trip themselves up. Paul didn't do that. If Paul did not know the answer to a question that you would ask when you were interviewing him, he would say, "I'm sorry, I don't know that." But if he did know the answer, he would tell you the truth, and that would be the statement that he would use every time he would be asked that question. He never changed even a word. That impressed me. One of the things that happened at the time that Paul, or just about the time Paul was coming forward with all of this, but it had not made the news yet, I was invited to be on a TV show, one of many network shows, and I was on with 3 psychics, and it was the Geraldo Rivera show. They were going to have these psychics make an attempt to solve Johnny's case. The one psychic said she wanted to talk to me after the show, privately. So I agreed. She came into my dressing room and she said, "I didn't want to say this on the air because it's just for you. There's a young man that's going to be coming forward with the truth about your son, and it's going to involve a long, long investigation. But he is telling the truth, and you should listen to him." I didn't reveal to her that I already knew about Paul Benassi, but it was interesting to me that this psychic would pick up on this information and be able to tell me anything. Up to that point, I had not placed too much credibility in the psychics that had come forward on this case, because there had been several hundred that called me, but no one had an answer. What my son was involved in was an organized kidnapping. It was not a random kidnapping. They knew who they were coming after. They had photographs of him ahead of time. I know this because a neighbor of ours saw Johnny being photographed on his way home from school 2 weeks before the kidnapping. The car had out-of-state plates, and the man leaned out the window and had a very long telephoto lens. The neighbor had reported it to the police. The police said, it's not a crime to take pictures, which I can't fault them for that. It isn't a crime to take pictures. But it turns out that those pictures are the ones that the kidnappers had with them the morning of the kidnapping. They knew they were coming after Johnny Gosch. Paul Benassi was in the back seat. He was young. He was only about 4 years older than my son when he helped to kidnap him. They used a child to lure another child to the car. Many times parents feel that if they tell their kids not to talk to strangers, that's enough. And they're meaning stranger adults. In this case, these kidnappers were very clever because they used a kid to lure a kid, and it worked. Evidently, Johnny came close enough to the car, they grabbed him and pulled him in. And that's why he was kidnapped. That's how he was kidnapped. Paul Benassi had been part of what became known as the Franklin Credit Union scandal in Omaha, Nebraska. Franklin was a credit union operated by a man by the name of Larry King. Larry King was a fast-rising star in the Republican Party, but he also had quite an appetite for sex with little boys. And he operated a very well-tuned pornography and prostitution operation where they would use young boys from Boys Town, as this was reported by many victims that came forward. Approximately 80 children came forward, all naming names in Omaha, Nebraska. This was all part of and tied to Johnny's kidnapping. And then I began to recall, 11 years later, that shortly after Johnny was kidnapped, about 3 weeks, there had been an article in the Des Moines Register. And there were 2 young girls taken from Des Moines. They were aged 13 and 14. They were taken to Omaha and they were put into a pornography ring. They were found, they were returned to Des Moines, and the men were arrested. I took that clipping from the newspaper and I went to our police chief and I asked him to investigate it. And he looked at me and he said, I don't have a feel for that, so I'm not going to do anything. I asked him to call the police chief of Omaha just to ask about it. Since Omaha was 2 hours away from Des Moines, that could be feasible that they could have come from Omaha to Des Moines to take these girls. They certainly could have taken my son too. Still, I could get no help from the police. I went to the FBI office and asked the same question. They told me they would not do it. So at that point, I did the only thing I could think of to do, and that was to call a press conference. And when I did, I read the clipping from the paper, and I said to everyone that would listen, the reaction of the police chief and the FBI, that they would not even check out this lead. 4 days after I did that TV interview, I received the first of many death threats. And the man that called me on the phone said, if you don't stop rocking the boat and making waves, you're going to die. And I remember sitting back after I got the phone call and thinking, what boat did I rock? What wave did I make? The wave was asking about Omaha. I was knocking on the back door of the Franklin Credit Union scandal years before the story broke. And the authorities here in Des Moines were not about to let this story break. They were not about to solve Johnny's case. I later found out that our police chief, Orville Cooney, was very good friends with Robert Wadman, who was the police chief in Omaha, Nebraska. They had many parties, orgies, if you will, where they used young boys and girls. Our police chief would travel to Omaha to the parties with Bob Wadman. Bob Wadman was accused of getting one young girl, Alicia Owen, pregnant during one of these episodes. So then it began to make perfect sense to me why our police chief told people to go home at the search site that Johnny was a runaway, why the police chief would not investigate the possible Omaha connection. He was involved with the same people. Now, as sick as that made me feel, I at least knew what I was dealing with. I at least knew what my obstacles were and what I had to continue to do. And I had to continue to keep Johnny's story alive, letting everybody in America know what was happening and that children were being ripped off the streets. At that point, I organized the Johnny Gosch Foundation, and I developed a program called In Defense of Children. And I went on the road. I went on the road speaking in churches, schools, civic organizations, network TV shows. I gave over 700 speeches in 5 years' time. I gave up what I used to call my life, or any type of recreation or enjoyment. I threw myself into this effort. During this time, I drafted and wrote pieces of legislation for the state of Iowa, which I got passed into law. And those laws were patterned for other states concerning missing and abused children. So, to me, Johnny's kidnapping had to stand for something. He was gone, but there had to be some degree of progress that was made in the system because of what happened to him. And it was my job to do it. And I knew that. The speeches and all of the things that I was doing were constantly keeping his name out there. The awareness level was staying up. Every time I did a TV show or a speech, leads and information would trickle in for our investigators to look over and begin to work on. Slowly, piece by piece, we were able to put this huge jigsaw puzzle together and finally know what happened to Johnny Gosch and why and who's responsible and how they profited off of many young children. Kiddie porn is a multi-billion-dollar business in this country. The only reason that it is because of supply and demand and supply. Somebody has to supply the children to the pedophiles who have the yen for young children and the money to pay for it. My son just happened to be one of them.
You asked me a question.
What you're doing, if I'm going along and I'm doing it, and if I haven't included everything, if Ted speaks up and says,
Jump right
Noreen,
in.
I want this too.
Yeah, no.
That's
yeah.
not going to hurt anything. If
No, you'll edit it out.
Okay. So if you see I'm not getting all of what you want, jump in so
Oh,
we
well.
can get it. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me know.
Oh, we're already going. You might want to turn a little bit more towards the TV set with your shoulders, yeah. No, try it back the other way. Yeah. A little bit more towards Ted, yeah. Okay, now bring your head this way. Oh, ain't that special? Okay.
Okay.
That was
Very
fun.
few times I let people tell me this many times what to do in a row.
Okay.
George can tell you that.
We're rolling.
Okay. The FBI from day one refused to investigate this case. But the thing I think that appalled me and amazed me the most was that after Paul Benassi had come forward and identified the fact that there was a van parked on another street, After we had learned this in the neighborhood search that our private investigators did, the FBI, when it was presented to them, still said that Paul Benassi was not credible and they would not investigate that aspect of Johnny's case. The FBI never did do the neighborhood search until I complained so many times and so bitterly to our senators, Senator Grassley and Harkin, both from Iowa, that the senators got in touch with the FBI office in Washington, and then the FBI in Des Moines were forced to do the neighborhood search, house by house. And one of the neighbors told me that the FBI was very disgruntled when they showed up to have to do the interview 3 years later, and said the only reason they were coming out to do it is because Mrs. Gosch forced it through the senators, that they had not intended to do it at all. The whole point with all of this, in my mind, is why? Why would a police chief not investigate? Why would he not do the things necessary to try and find my little boy? And why would the FBI refuse to investigate a bona fide kidnapping case that had witnesses? Why would they keep saying, "We have no crime"? I got so sick of hearing that phrase, "we have no crime," that it just about destroyed me. Were they that stupid? Did they not know how to investigate a case like this? Were they naive? Were they just compliant in protecting some bigwig that was a pedophile? Or were they involved in it themselves? Those are the questions that I've had all these years, and I have formed my own opinion as to why I think they did not investigate my son's case properly. And I believe that it is the last in his involvement. A few months after my son was kidnapped, approximately 6, there was a young boy kidnapped on the way to school. He was a high school kid, and he was driving an Eldorado Cadillac. And the kidnappers used the kid's cell phone to call the parents and tell them that they wanted a ransom demand of money. The FBI sent in many agents to Des Moines. They had the kid back within 36 hours. The next day, the FBI came to my home to gloat at how well they did the case. And Special Agent Herb Hawkins, who was in charge of a 5-state area, led the team as they came into my home. And he said to me that they really had to work on that case because there was a human life at stake. And my reaction was, well, what do you think my son is? Don't you think his life matters? And Herb Hawkins said to me, and I will never forget this, he looked at me and he said, "Mrs. Gosch, there's something you don't understand. The other family, they're very wealthy. They're very prominent in Des Moines. We had to search for their son because they just are more prominent people than you are." Mr. Hawkins had no idea, but he did me a favor that day because he told me what the story really was. And I don't remember doing this, but I evidently picked up a coffee cup full of hot coffee, and I hurled it across the room, and the cup and the coffee missed Herb Hawkins' face by about 1/4 of an inch. At that point, he said, I can see that you're distraught. Is there anything I can do for you? And I said, yes, you can get the hell out of my house. Don't ever come back. If you're not going to investigate my son's case, then step aside because I'm coming through. I will find out what happened to my son, regardless of whether you accept the information or whether you don't. I will at least know before I die.
Okay, what about the Johnny Gosch Foundation? Tell us about that and also the laws that you had passed. More details on the laws.
Okay. Johnny was missing only about a month when I decided to form the Johnny Gosch Foundation. The foundation was to help raise money to pay for private investigators to search for Johnny. That was the primary goal in the beginning. As soon as we filed for a 501(c)(3) standing, the IRS contacted us and told us that that had never been granted before for a child that was currently missing, only for a child that had been found dead, and that we would have to prove that we were doing something for other children. And we were put on a 2-year probationary period, which we passed with flying colors, because it was during that time that I drafted the first piece of legislation called the Johnny Gosch bill. That bill provided for any family who had a missing child to get an immediate investigation started. No more waiting 72 hours, no more dragging the feet. The FBI would be called in and the investigation would start immediately. That law passed, and within 1 month after the governor signed it into law in 1984, the second newspaper carrier from Des Moines, Iowa, Eugene Martin, was kidnapped in the very same manner as my son. He started out on his route, and 2 men grabbed him and threw him in a car, and off they went. Same scenario, same people. The other pieces of legislation that I facilitated in getting passed were laws that pertain to sexually abused children and the ability for them to testify before video cameras instead of having to relate what happened to them in open courtroom in front of their assailant. We passed a number of laws in 1 year that all had components to the sexually abused child, and we called it the Children's Bill of Rights. A lot of our laws that we passed here in Iowa were adopted by other states that border Iowa, so that we had some uniformity in the central part of the United States as to some type of code on missing and abused children. And it was about at the same time that the National Center for Missing Children in Washington, D.C. was formed. They had gathered parents of missing children and flown us all to Texas to testify before the Justice Department on video. We were to tell what went wrong in our cases, and we were to name names in terms of the police chief, the FBI, whoever didn't do their job. We were to explain how they didn't do it, why they didn't do it. I was one of the parents that participated. When it was my turn to speak, I related what happened to my son and the mistakes on the case. At the end of my speech, I stated that if the FBI was not going to investigate missing children's cases, then the Justice Department should cut their funding. And they should take that amount of money and give it to the organization to start a missing children's center, so that those of us who have missing children would have some government agency to turn to for assistance. At the time I did that, you could hear a pin drop in the room. John Walsh, who is now with America's Most Wanted, at that time he was just a grieving parent like I was, he came rushing over to me and he said, "I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you said to cut their funding." And I said, "John, I meant it. If they're not going to do the job, cut their funding and give it to someone who will." I said, "I'm very serious about it. Why does everyone think the FBI is a sacred cow that you can't challenge?" They didn't do the job for my son. They didn't follow their own code of ethics for the criteria of a kidnapping case. Perhaps if they would have moved a little swifter, Johnny would be with me today. Ken?
Okay, what about your husband being a suspect? You suspect he might be involved?
Okay. A number of years after Johnny was kidnapped, I had the occasion to go to John DeCamp's office in Lincoln, Nebraska. And we were going to be discussing some avenues on the case to help bring it more towards a legal resolution and solving it. I entered the room, and John came over. I had never met him before. And he came over and grabbed a hold of my hand. He was very gracious, and he said, "Oh, Noreen, it is so good to see you again. It's been such a long time." And I looked at him and I said, "John, I've never been to your office before. I've never met you before." He said, "Well, of course you did. You came over here in 1988 or 1989 with your husband. And we all went out to the prison to talk to Paul Benassi." And I said, "No, it wasn't me. I have never been here." So at that point, John DeCamp called his main secretary and office manager in, and he said, "Didn't John Gosch come over here in 1988 or 89, and didn't he bring Noreen, and didn't we go out to the prison?" And Jan said, "Yes, he did, yes, you did, but it wasn't this woman." And she pointed at me. "He brought somebody else that looks like her. It's not the same woman." I didn't know what to say. I was speechless. They later got out all of their telephone records going back to 1988 and 89, and we discovered that there had been a phone number and a fax number set up in Des Moines where John DeCamp was to call and or fax information on Johnny's case. But he was instructed to never, ever call the Gosch home and disturb Mrs. Gosch, only to use this other number, which has since been disconnected. Since that situation has taken place, I have learned and met 25 other people that all had been introduced to this other woman that my ex-husband made everyone believe was me. She looked a lot like me, and with the help of John DeCamp and the Attorney General of Nebraska, I was able to learn her identity and get her photograph. This made my husband look very suspect. How and why would he have an imposter of his wife, Johnny's mother, traveling around the country with him, going to speeches, going to prisons, speaking in many circles concerning his son? It took me a number of years to find out about all of this, but now that I have the truth, now that I know the information, it makes the big question mark over my ex-husband's head that much larger. What part did he play in this? Why on earth would he need to have an imposter? What was the purpose of all of this? There's no answers at this point other than perhaps he was involved in something that he was trying to keep from me as well. That may come out later. In the meantime, I've written a book, and my book is called Why Johnny Can't Come Home. It gives the entire story of Johnny's kidnapping. Who, how, why. And in this book, you'll find a picture of my ex-husband with the woman that he has professed to others and introduced to others as me. It has come to my attention, and I've been informed, that the woman posing as me, once she learned that her picture is in my book, has now had a stroke. I have not given her name publicly because it is still undetermined as to whether charges will be filed against her for impersonating me. And so until such time as she's charged with a crime, I cannot reveal her name publicly in this format. But all of this went on behind the scenes in the Johnny Gosch case. Now I ask anybody who's viewing this video, does this sound like a normal kidnapping case to you? Where some pedophile would grab a kid, use them, and kill them? No. Police, FBI not cooperating, someone impersonating the mother, the mother receiving death threats. None of these things are typical in a normal kidnap case. Why then was Johnny's case different? Who's involved at the top? Who's pulling strings? Who controls the FBI and the police to the degree that they would not look for a little 12-year-old boy who did nothing to anyone?
That's outstanding. That little section there. That goes in the video.
You should come to one of my speeches. You should come to one of my speeches.
I've been to your speeches.
Oh,
yeah, I remember I had a lecture and you were in the audience, and I said, "Come on up."
That was just a pop-up thing. You should come to one of the ones where I really roar.
Okay, now,
Gosch, fire and
here's
brimstone.
Noreen, Gosch.
Here's what I want you to cover. I want you to cover. Paul was the one that told you that the kids went, that they transferred Johnny to Sioux City and then to Colorado.
Yeah, we didn't do Sioux
We didn't
City
do
yet.
that, so let's cover that. With Paul Benassi said so and so.
I think we'll start back at the van.
Yeah.
Okay. At the time that we learned from Paul Benassi, who was confirming the fact that there was a van parked on the street with a motor running and a body was transferred to it, or something long wrapped in a blanket was transferred to the van, and Paul identified that situation as Johnny's body being moved. The van pulled out and headed for Sioux City, Iowa. The other vehicle that was involved also left the area, and they all rendezvoused at a farmhouse outside of Sioux City, and it was on the Charlie Kerr farm. On that farm was an old house which has since been burned down, but Johnny was kept in the basement for a period of 2 weeks. He was sexually abused by Paul and one other young man on film. Paul was instructed to do this at gunpoint. After Johnny had been kept there for 2 weeks, a man by the name of, they called him the Colonel, came to the farmhouse and paid the kidnappers cash. Paul remembered seeing many big bills, $100 bills coming out of his wallet. They were paid in cash for doing the job of grabbing Johnny. Paul identified this man as Colonel Michael Aquino. He then heard that Johnny was going to be leaving and going back to Colorado and to the West Coast with Aquino, and Paul did not see Johnny again until 1986 in Colorado, so reportedly at the Colonel's home, where they were having an orgy type of situation with adults using children sexually. And Johnny was there with Paul and many other kids. At that point, Johnny's identity was known as the name of Mark, and his hair had been dyed black to change his appearance somewhat. And Paul then, as I mentioned, lost track of him for a period of years.
Let me interrupt you a minute. You said in Michael Aquino's home in Colorado. Is that right? Yes.
Ranch.
Okay.
It was a ranch.
We want you, yeah, because everybody can say, well, there's no credibility here, because I know he doesn't have a home in Colorado. He's got a home in San Francisco, you know what I mean?
Okay. Paul Benassi reported to us that the ranch that they were taken to in Colorado belonged to the Colonel, and he referenced and referred to the Colonel as Colonel Michael Aquino, and that it was at this ranch in a remote area somewhere up in the mountains is where they had the parties, and all of these people would come where they know that they could use young children. Paul stated that the kids were also flown all over the United States to different parts of the country wherever there was a wealthy, well-heeled pedophile that wanted a boy of a certain description. This was quite common, to move the kids around a great deal. Is that okay?
Yeah. How about Paul? Now, how about Johnny come to visit you?
Okay. In December of 1996, I was invited to Los Angeles to be on the Lisa Gibbons talk show. I had been on there several times before, and this particular time, she had me on with a group of other mothers who had lost their children, and it was right before Christmas, and she asked if we wanted to give a Christmas message to each of our children if they were still alive. I looked at the camera, and I spoke directly to Johnny, and I said, Johnny, if you're still out there, and if you're alive and you're getting this message, I'll help you in any way I possibly can. I still live in West Des Moines. I've divorced your father, and my name and address are listed in the phone book so that you can find me. Contact me and I'll help you. I then flew home, and it was approximately 3.5 months later, in March of the year 1997, when someone started knocking at my door in the middle of the night. And it was a consistent knock. They kept on knocking and pounding at the door. I went to the door, and I lived alone, and I would not have normally opened the door at that time of night. But I looked out the little security hole in the door, and I could see 2 young men in the hallway. The hall lights were on, and I could see the facial features of one of the boys, and he looked like Johnny. And I said, who's there? And he said, it's me, Mom, it's Johnny. So I let them in. The one young man that was with Johnny did not talk. He kept very quiet, and he would not give me his name. It was a very emotional reunion, because I had not seen Johnny for many years. But when he came in, I thought he was home to stay. I thought this was his return. And I said, you're going to have a safe place to stay. I said, let me call somebody that can come here tonight and give us some legal advice and some help. And he said to me, I can't stay. You don't understand. It's not safe. And I said, you wouldn't be safe if I stayed. They'll kill me. And then my son went on to talk about the high-level pornography and prostitution drug-running group that he had been taken into. And he talked about Colonel Michael Aquino. He talked about some of the local people in Des Moines, Iowa that he knew were involved. People across the country that were in high places politically, he mentioned. Some senators all the way to the White House. I sat there and I was shocked because I had not heard any of this. And he told me that he wanted me to get his story out. He wanted me to do something that would start to make some arrests happen so that he and the other kids that were involved could someday be free, maybe to go reunite with their families. But at this point, they had no choice but to hide out. He also explained to me that he and a couple of the other boys had stolen a car earlier, several years earlier, and that's how they got away from the actual kidnappers, the ones that actually controlled their movements on a daily basis, keeping them in safe houses across the country. And that when they stole this car, they went to one of the boys' homes, and his father was a CPA in another city, a very well-respected man. They stayed there several days, and from that house, Johnny and one of the other young boys went to an Indian reservation to live. And Johnny ended up living on many Indian reservations in seclusion, disguising himself, making himself look like a Native American during that period of his life. And he did that to avoid being found. He went to an Indian reservation to avoid being apprehended, if you will, by authorities, because it's a sovereign state. They knew they'd be safe on an Indian reservation. He remained there until publicity again started to reach a high level nationally concerning his case. Then he left the last Indian reservation and has gone on to remain in hiding in other places of the country. During the time that he did remain on the Indian reservation, he fell into probably another form of control, another form of crime level, and many of the kids that are taken into this type of crime will not ever ask for help. They won't go to their parents. They won't go to police for help because they've been forced to commit felonies. While my son was here with me during our visit, which lasted about 2.5 hours, These are many of the things that he related to me, the hows, the whys, many of the details. He did not, however, tell me the intimate details of the type of abuse that he received. I knew that it was sexual, and I think that he did not want the embarrassment for himself and the hurt for me to have to hear it. At one point, he said that he was going to have to leave because he couldn't stay any longer. And as much as I hated to see him go, I knew that he had to go for his own safety. When he and the other young man left my home that night, I ran outside after them, and they disappeared into the night on foot. I did not see any cars they got into. I did not hear any engines start up. So I know that they had to have had a car parked some distance away and then walked to my place so that they could slip away easily without being noticed. That was the last time that I saw my son. That meeting was very meaningful to me because I knew that he had seen the broadcast that I was on. I knew that all the TV shows that I was doing was for a reason, a good reason. The off chance that my son might see the message that I was still looking, I still cared, and I still love him.
Did he mention any snuff films?
During the time that we were together, Johnny mentioned that there were children that were killed during the filming of certain sexual films, and that those were called snuff films, and that those sold for very high prices, and they always had people who would pay the money for them. And in that type of a film, there had to be more children used because the main character died. And he did explain how that worked as well. A lot of people in America don't want to think that this is happening, let alone the degree of filth that is associated with it. But it is real, it is happening in our country, and not as many kidnap cases receive the amount of publicity that Johnny's did. So that is why a lot of people don't think we have a problem in our country. It's because you don't hear about it as much. I made Johnny's case a national case. I became his publicity agent in order to keep the story alive. But rest assured, a multi-billion-dollar business continues, and they have to have the children to do it.
Did Johnny mention anything about other children being kidnapped, him being involved in, like Paul was, as a decoy and so forth?
One of the things that disturbed Johnny a great deal, as he explained it to me, is that when they have the kids and they start to grow up and they outlive their usefulness in terms of a sexual object, they then are turned into perpetrators to kidnap other children. While they're still young, they're used as lures to lure other children. But in adulthood, they're turned into perpetrators. And so I am sure he didn't give details about his own involvement in that, but I am sure he has seen that side of it as well. And it would probably be considered by many that he would have committed and broken the law, committed crimes and broken the law himself for such acts.
Okay, what about naming names? Who did he identify? I know Aquino's the only one name you've mentioned so far.
That was, when Johnny was here, he did name names, some of which have never been spoken of before to me. Michael Aquino was the big one that he talked about the most. But in terms of the politicians that he mentioned, he has stated the very same ones that Paul Benassi and many others have named and have been damned for doing it. And do you want me to name the same ones?
I don't know that we'll put it in, but let's put it on camera.
Okay. Some of the names that have come through other victims as well as my son is the names of...
I wrote a letter to the FBI and I said, election fraud violation. Right? I spoke to the U.S. Attorney first because I knew the FBI would probably ignore me. And she wrote me a nice letter back and said, I'm referring this to the FBI.
How did they know Johnny was going to be alone that morning? And I heard something in court that I'd never heard before, anywhere. Paul Bonassi straightened up in the chair, and he said, well, they made prior arrangements with Johnny's father. How did they know Johnny was going to be alone that morning? And I heard something in court that I'd never heard before, anywhere. Paul Bonassi straightened up in the chair, and he said, well, they made prior arrangements with Johnny's father. I was blown away.
Well, see, that,
I about fell off my chair in the courtroom.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yep. And that's important, and that can all go in this section.
Yeah, I have a note on it.
Yeah.
On the father.
Were you surprised when you heard that in court?
I already did.
Huh? You already had heard that?
I have a note. I have a note on that right here. I was going to ask you about that. Why the father? Weren't you suspicious when the father, in 13 years, the only time he never went with Johnny was that morning?
13 months.
13 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I was. Rusty, how did you know that John... Oh, wait a minute.
Being in the circles.
I know. I remember what you told me in DeCamp's office. Do you remember? Because you also said it on a radio program.
No.
And I've got the tape.
You're lucky to have the tape, because he never got me one.
What about soda? We didn't.
I've got the tape put away.
We didn't mention soda's name either.
No, we didn't talk about soda, but we can.
Yeah.
Rusty, when he was shown a picture of John Gosch with no labels on it or anything in DeCamp's office, remember?
Picked it out.
George pulled out the picture,
Mhm.
and he says, do you know this guy? And he held up John Gosch's picture. And Rusty says, yeah, I met him in Larry King's office.
He was at Larry's office.
He's over at the Max, and he was also at Larry King's office.
Yeah.
What? Karen Burns told me that the very first time she ever laid eyes on John Gosch, she suspected him.
Yeah, your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was he participating in all the parties, too? Did he go to those in Nebraska? Did you ever see one?
That many of the parties. I tried to avoid those like the
Mm-hmm.
plague.
But in your circle of talking to people, did you ever hear of him going to those parties? Because, see, he was gone all the time, Rusty.
Yeah.
He'd leave on Sunday morning. He wouldn't get back till Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would get his laundry done, pack up, and he'd leave again. He would never tell me where he was staying. I never had a phone number or an itinerary
Farther than Edward.
of where to reach him.
Yeah. Have we got new film in there? Is it running?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Okay, all right.
Hey, that's the best stuff.
Let's go with it. Go.
I figured we got this much tonight.
In 1999, John DeCamp called me and asked me if I would come to Omaha, Nebraska. In 1999, John DeCamp called me and asked me if I would come to Lincoln, Nebraska to testify in a federal court hearing for Paul Bonassi. Paul Bonassi was going to file charges against Larry King for his own abuse that he received at the hands of Larry King. It would be one of the first times a victim was able to do this in a federal court. I testified about Johnny's story, what happened, but then the most interesting thing started to develop when Paul testified. The judge asked Paul to relate the entire story about Johnny's kidnapping. Paul told every detail of how Johnny was kidnapped, why, for what purpose, the fact that he was taken to Sioux City, then sold into this ring. The judge then asked Paul, how did the kidnappers know Johnny Gosch would be alone that morning on the paper route? And Paul Bonassi sat straight up in the chair. He looked at the judge and he said, prior arrangements were made with Johnny's father to be sure that Johnny would be alone on the route that morning. I was sitting in the courtroom. I had never heard this before in all the years of the investigation, and I about fainted. The other key question that the judge asked Paul Benassi was, why did they pick Johnny? What did they want him for when there's so many runaways to choose from? And Paul Benassi said Johnny fit the criteria of what they were looking for in a victim, someone to use in this manner. After the judge ruled in favor of Paul Benassi in this federal court ruling by Judge Erbaum, which awarded Paul Benassi damages in the amount of $1 million, the judge also stated in court that he believed that Paul Benassi was telling the truth about his own abuse and that of the kidnapping of my son Johnny. To me, this meant new information and a new focus for the investigation. I traveled back to Des Moines and I made an appointment with the police department and the county attorney. I presented them with the information about the federal court ruling, Paul Benassi's testimony about Johnny's kidnapping, and they looked at me and they said, well, I'm sorry. We simply do not accept Judge Erbaum's ruling. We do not feel Paul Benassi is credible despite what the judge has said. I then went to the new governor of Iowa, Governor Tom Vilsack, who had taken office several months before. I approached him because I know he has the power to force the law enforcement to act. Tom Vilsack, Iowa's governor, stated that neither kidnapping of Johnny or Eugene Martin, the two newspaper boys from Des Moines that are missing, were any of his concern, and that I should take up my problems with the Department of Public Safety. That's the message that he gave me. He was not concerned. In Iowa, the Department of Public Safety does a lot of things. They place traffic lights at busy street corners. They do lots of other things, but they don't do kidnapped children. But the governor wasn't interested. This is, again, the reaction that I got when the evidence was given to these men. I would ask the question again, is it utter stupidity? Do they not understand how to do an investigation? Is this investigation, these crimes, so far out of their league, they don't know what to do? Are they protecting someone who is high up in our government, or are they involved themselves? Or is it all four? It's a multiple choice question. Think about it and you choose. What has happened here is a travesty. It's a horrible miscarriage of justice, and the tragedy of two young boys being ripped off the streets should never have been allowed to happen. And even though that it did, there should have been a prior or much better investigation after this new evidence, especially after this new evidence was reported.
Did the police ever investigate the Martin case, Martin kidnapping?
When Eugene Martin was kidnapped in 1984, they
This was
brought...
6 months after Johnny.
No, it was 2 years.
2 years, okay, start again.
2 years after my son was kidnapped in 1984, Eugene Martin, another paper carrier, was kidnapped off the streets of Des Moines. At that kidnapping, the FBI they were called in. They brought in 22 agents from Quantico, Virginia, to investigate the case, something they didn't do for Johnny. They did aerial searches, which they wouldn't do for Johnny. They brought in dog teams, which they didn't do for Johnny. All of the things that should have been proper investigation for Johnny and wasn't done, they did do for the Martin boy. I don't understand why there would be such a difference, except that there was a public outcry. The citizens of Iowa raised the roof at two kids being kidnapped. When it was just my son, there was not that public outcry, and I don't understand why. A few months before Paul Bonacci was kidnapped, or before Eugene Martin was kidnapped, a man called me by the name of Sam Soda.
Excuse me, go back. Start again, say a few months before Johnny.
A few months before Johnny was kidnapped, a man by the name of Sam Soda, a private investigator locally, called me. He wanted to meet, and he said that he had information that there was going to be a second kidnapping in Des Moines. When I asked him where, how did he know this, he wouldn't reveal his sources, but he told me that it would be the second weekend in August of 1984, that it would be the south side of Des Moines, and it would be another paperboy. And I said, well, why are you telling me? And he said, so I could go to the authorities. When I asked Sam Soda how he knew this information about a second kidnapping, he wouldn't reveal his sources, but he told me that he wanted me to go to the authorities and tell them. I had made a tape recording of that conversation. So I went to the Des Moines Police Department and wanted to play my tape for them, and they laughed at me. And they sort of patted me on the head and sent me out the door. I then went to the TV stations and talked to the managers of each of the TV stations here in Des Moines and told them about it. They at least listened, but they didn't want to hear my tape. I also then talked to Frank Santiago of the Des Moines Register, and I told him about this whole possibility of another kidnapping. At that point, I was to fly to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Senate hearings. I went, testified in Washington, and flew home. The next day, 2020, came to Des Moines to film Johnny's story. This was now August of 1984. Karen Burns, the producer, was in our home. After we did the interviews, I told her about this prediction of a second kidnapping. And I told her about Sam Soda, and I let her listen to the tape recording. And she said, well, what have you done about this? And I told her I went to the police, I went to the press, they all know about it. She says, I think I'll stay the night. So the film crew flew back to New York. Karen stayed in Des Moines. The next morning, my phone rang, and...
Okay, start with the next morning. You received that phone call.
The next morning, the next morning, our phone rang early, and it was the TV reporter from Channel 5, which is our ABC station in Des Moines, and he was telling me that, yes, Mrs. Gosch, there's been another kidnapping, just like you said it would happen. And he was just out of breath. He was a real young kid. And I said to him, how do you know it's a kidnapping? He says, I just heard it. Hello? Hi? I'm fine.
Okay.
The next morning, my phone rang, and it was a reporter from Channel 5, our ABC station, and he starts out by saying, Mrs. Gosch, there's been another kidnapping, just like you said was going to happen, just exactly the way you said it would happen. The south side of Des Moines, another paper boy. He said, the FBI's been called in. And I said, how do you know all this? He said, well, it was on the police scanners, and they're treating it as a kidnapping right away. So I thanked him, and that was the end of it. I called Karen Burns at the Marriott Hotel. I woke her up, and I said, Karen, it's just happened. There's been another kidnapping, just as the man told me. Call and get your own film crew back here from New York. Don't use the locals on this one. So Karen called New York. They got a film crew on a plane, and by about 9 o'clock, they were into Des Moines. They blasted into the Des Moines police station with a microphone in her hand, and they shoved it in the face of the police chief, and they said, are you going to do aerial searches for this boy? They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you calling in the FBI They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you bringing in K-9 teams? They wouldn't for Johnny Gosch. And they put the police chief on the spot, and this went on national television. Later, they continued to investigate the Martin case, and he was not found either. However, I thought the police would come to me like men and want to discuss the tape I had and want to know who it was that gave me the information. They did not. Instead, they told me that if I ever breathed a word of it to the Martin family, they would put a gag order on me and they would press charges against me, some kind of charges to make me wish I had never spoken to the Martin family. Well, it was apparent to me that they did not want the word out that the second kidnapping had been known ahead of time and that it could have been prevented. So what was Sam Soda in this whole concoction, this whole equation? Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, they called him Soda Pop. Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, brought photographs of my son to a motel room the night before the kidnapping and said, "This is the kid that we're taking in the morning." Sam Soda, according to Paul Bonacci, was present at the farm outside of Sioux City, and he watched as Paul Bonacci had sex with my son, and the pictures were snapped and taken of it. That he had been involved in the whole thing from the beginning, according to Paul Bonacci's testimony, which he gave in court, and which was ruled on in a federal court ruling as being truth.
Did they ever find the Martin kid?
The Martin boy's never been found.
Did Johnny or anybody else tell you or Paul that the Martin kid was part of the same operation, the same ring?
In many of the discussions that I've had with Paul Bonacci, as well as some other victims, some who do not want their names mentioned, they have all said that Paul Bonacci told the truth, that he, in fact, did know that Eugene Martin was part of the same kidnapping plot, same people, same purpose in mind, as well as other boys throughout the country. One such victim also told me that Jacob Wetterling, a little boy from Minnesota, was also a victim of this same group.
Has Wetterling ever been found?
No, all the boys are still missing. I have been told, however, that Eugene Martin and Jacob Wetterling are both still alive. Hello?
Hang on. A breather?
They didn't do anything. It was just a static thing.
Okay, are you on camera now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you tell the police about Soda at all, or did you tell the FBI about Soda? Knowing in advance of this kidnapping?
Yes, I told the police and I told the FBI about Sam Soda. And all they said to me was, he denies ever saying such a thing. And I argued with them, and the police were not willing to do anything about it. It took many years later before I found out why. There used to be a place in Des Moines called Barry's Lounge. And upstairs in Barry's Lounge, they showed films, all kinds of adult variety films, some that were kiddie porn. And a waitress that had worked there called me on the phone after Barry's Lounge burned and told me that Sam Soda was the one that used to bring in a big brown sack wrapped with lots and lots of duct tape, and he would disappear upstairs on the nights that they were showing the films of kiddie porn, and that he in fact was the supplier and delivered the goods on the nights that they had those films.
What goods?
The kiddie porn films.
Oh, the films.
Mm-hmm. And that is how Sam Soda factored into it, and that many of the people that came to see the films were some of Des Moines' finest.
Do you have the names of these Des Moines finest people?
The waitress did not give me the names. She just said that they were Des Moines cops and some Des Moines detectives that attended. So therefore, when I would squawk about Sam Soda's involvement, there is no way that the police would ever approach him, ever do anything to him, because he was part of it. They were part of it.
Did Paul, no, excuse me, go back. Did Johnny mention to you that these kids were also used in satanic ceremonies?
Yes.
Start again. Forget I asked you that question. Just start.
My son also mentioned when he was here that the kids were forced to participate in satanic, and the rituals were more to create and cause the kids to...
Turn it on. Better turn it off.
Again?
Did Johnny ever tell you about the kids being involved in satanic ceremonies?
Okay. When my son visited, he also told me that the kids were involved in satanic ceremonies and rituals in which they did the killing of babies and sacrificing in some very bizarre types of acts. The rituals had a dual purpose. They were also used as a way to traumatize and control the victims as much as the exhilaration, so to speak, of the people that were involved in doing them. They would get a certain hype or momentum going with all of the participants, and they would enter into kind of a different mindset or frenzy in doing these rituals. And he felt that it was a dual purpose of control as well.
Did Johnny say anything about where these babies came from that were being sacrificed?
The only term that I can recall that Johnny talked about, as well as some of the other victims that I spoke with, they used the term breeder mothers as one. And situations where the babies would not be born in a normal situation where there would be a birth certificate in a hospital. The births were done in a home place, or the fetus would be aborted in a type of miscarriage situation before it would have reached full term.
Did Johnny ever talk to you or tell you anything about the other kidnappings where they used these kids that they kidnapped for the satanic ceremonies?
Where they used the kid? Did they use them to lure other kids?
No, and as victims.
No, he didn't talk about
Didn't
that.
say that. Okay.
No.
So the main thing is they kidnap these kids in order to put them into the inner circle, use them for sex objects, and then make sure they were blackmailed and never get out.
As a way to blackmail politicians or get them under their thumb.
Summarize that.
Okay.
What Johnny said.
Okay. From what I was able to learn from my own son and from other victims that I've talked to over the years, is that the kids that were kidnapped and put into the pornography and prostitution end of this horrific crime, they were used to intimidate and to infiltrate a level of our government and officials where they could be controlled and blackmailed for their deeds and acts with children. Therefore, whoever was in control of the children also then had control of that politician. Okay?
Good. That's important. Could you think of anything else? Did we miss anything?
Rusty, did we miss anything?
Rusty wasn't listening.
You weren't listening?
I am and I'm not. I guess there's sort of...
You know, I'm thinking...
It's like a wall
Don't pay
goes up.
attention to him. He's the cameraman.
Well, I know he's a cameraman, but he was in court with us and all of that, and I'm just wondering if there's
whenever
any...
I get into this stuff, it's just like a wall goes up.
He closes down.
Oh, I just wondered if he thought there was any other details.
It's
George,
all part
can you
of
think
the
of any other
epilepsy
details?
bit.
Well, did we miss anything?
He told them all about your life. No.
Miss anything in your opinion today?
No.
We covered it all?
I think we've covered it all. We got Sam Soda, the judge's ruling, Johnny's kidnapping, Johnny's visit.
The book, the
book.
The foundation.
John.
And my website is www.johnnygosch.com.
Yep, there. Now I can see it.
On this website, you'll find information about Johnny's story, the kidnapping of other children, and you'll find a 52-page report based on the investigation by Ted Gunderson on my son's case and the related Franklin Credit Union cover-up.
What's the name of the website again?
The name of my website is www.johnnygosch.com. And the title of my book is Why Johnny Can't Come Home. This will give you the full story of why children are being kidnapped in America.
We can put some headings on that.
Yeah, well.
And then, you know those little square things I have in there?
Yeah.
I'll give you some of those to use because they're real clear and they're easy to shoot.
Yeah.
And then those other pictures that you want, I'll get those gathered up. And
we need to get a good still of Johnny right there.
And the Reader's Digest. No.
Yeah, and the Reader's Digest.
TV Guide, Reader's Digest.
It might take me a day or two to dig that out because when I got
Inquirer.
finished...
No, listen, don't send the originals. Make copies.
I'll make copies.
Make good copies.
Make good copies.
I've got a real good copy machine. I'll make color copies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, if nothing else, bring them to Kinko's and get really good copies.
Okay. All right. I'll make a copy of the cover, and then I'll open it up to the page where it shows Conspiracy of Silence, and I'll get a good shot of that.
Now, let me ask you another question. Do you have any information as to why Conspiracy of Silence was never aired?
The only information I was told, and that
Sorry, start again.
Oh, it was for the camera. I thought it was the
No,
conversation.
for the camera.
In May of 1994, a film called Conspiracy of Silence was supposed to be aired. It had appeared in the TV Guide, and it was supposed to air this on a certain evening. It was related to me by John DeCamp that the network, the Discovery Channel, received a phone call and they were told to pull it off the air. Yorkshire TV, who filmed this broadcast, also were told that the film was not going to be able to be aired and they were ordered to destroy all copies. I was also told that Discovery Channel was at that point purchased by the Bush family. I don't know that to be true, but that is the report that I was given by John DeCamp.
We'll get John DeCamp on that one.
Because he's the one that told me that the Bush family bought it. And then that night, I mean, just hours before it was supposed to go on, it was jerked off the air, and then they were told to destroy the
I
film.
mentioned that they were paid for the film, $400,000 for their efforts in film, so
Yeah.
Yeah, what they were paid for it.
Yorkshire was paid for the rights to their work involved in the film. It was never aired.
Oh, okay. Yorkshire TV, as far as I know, were paid $400,000 for their work and contribution in filming, for all the expenses in filming this Conspiracy of Silence. Who paid it, I don't know.
Maybe John has some information on it. We're going to interview John.
Yeah, I do not know who paid that amount.
Anything else we haven't covered you can think of?
You talked about the second kidnapping here
Yes.
involving
The Martin kid?
Yeah.
Have there been any other
Talk about the death threats I got.
Any other kidnappings since then?
Not in Des Moines or Iowa.
Oh, I know a question I wanted to ask. In fact, I got it on my notes. Are we on camera now? What's the reaction of the Des Moines Register? In other words, did the Des Moines Register say anything or help you out in regard to the fact that the FBI and the police refused to investigate this? Did they come to your rescue? Did they give you adequate publicity? Did they support you?
In the very beginning, when Johnny was kidnapped, there was a lot of publicity about Johnny's case, and they reported it fairly accurately. Then about a week or so...
Excuse me. The Des Moines Register reported it. Start again.
Okay.
Instead of saying they reported it, because I'm not going to be on there.
Right. The Des Moines Register, in the beginning, gave us adequate coverage after Johnny was kidnapped. Pictures of Johnny and a fairly good story about it. Within a few days, however, the story began to change and it began to be slanted against the family. I received a phone call from a woman who worked in the newsroom. She would not identify herself, but she said, "You need to know this." The editor came into the newsroom and instructed every one of the writers who would handle the Johnny Gosch story to slant all stories against the family. And those were the orders that we were given. She said, I'm a mother, and I can't imagine what you're going through. I'll lose my job if I give you my name, but you need to know what you're up against in this town. The Des Moines Register did start some kind of a reward fund. They collected thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Not one penny of it was ever given to either family of the Martins or me, but instead someone decided at a much later date to give the money to a runaway shelter. So none of the money was used ever for Johnny or Eugene.
Okay. Runaway shelter. Means it went in the politicians or somebody's pocket.
You know which runaway shelter?
Yes, Ames, Iowa.
Ames, Iowa. What, Ames, Iowa runaway shelter?
George Belitza ran it.
Do you have any other thoughts, George?
Do you know him? George Belitza? He ran it at that time. I don't know if
I think we've covered everything, don't you?
I think so too.
I mean, normally an interview with you would go 2 or 3 days, but but no, seriously, you can't get into an interview for video in all that detail.
A lot of times when the big crews come in, it is 2 or 3 days.
Oh, no.
Because they do action stuff, you know. They want you to,
Yeah.
like one wanted me to show what else I did in my life, so they wanted me on the floor doing yoga. And,
yeah. No, but I'm talking about real in-depth debriefing would take a long time.
oh,
We
well,
missed
But
that.
that's because there's so much, but for the purposes of the...
for what you wanted,
Yeah,
to clip and snip a little bit out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's basically filler and highlight.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to hit the same points that John DeCamp and Paul Van
Yeah.
Helsing bring out so that it relates to how Omaha
Weave it
Yeah.
right in.
connects with Des
Touch on
Moines.
the fact that 2020 spent years and hundreds of thousands of dollars working on this.
And then
deal.
canceled the show.
Yeah, to do that, that's another point. Good, thanks, George.
What would I do without you?
I have no idea.
Probably not be married.
No, that's good, that's
He's
very
free,
good.
wouldn't he?
So,
Explain
the Des Moines
why.
Register,
Just keep
the
it
Des Moines
easy, right?
Register scared, the FBI won't investigate, the police won't investigate it.
In 1997, I was approached by Karen Burns with ABC once again. They had done Johnny's story 4 or 5 times throughout all of the years. This time she wanted to do a special, a 1-hour special called The Johnny Gosch Story, The Final Curtain, meaning the final conclusion of what happened. They spent 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars filming victims, filming everyone across the country that was remotely connected with this. And then we were told that it would not air. And they postponed and postponed and postponed until finally they told me that it would not air at all. In a later conversation with another producer at ABC, I learned that 2020 has spread the word throughout the ABC building that they own the Johnny Gosch story, and they are not going to show it or sell it to anyone else, that they will be the ones that will interview Johnny Gosch himself when he decides to come forward, and they will have the total exclusive in the country. And that is why it is on a shelf in ABC today and has not been aired.
Do you think there's more than that to it?
I believe, however, that there's much more to this. I believe that the producer, Karen Burns, has probably been threatened and or others in the organization bought off. Disney has bought ABC, and it is a big player in the whole Franklin Credit Union
Excuse me, let
situation.
me correct you. I heard that Disney bought 2020. They don't own ABC. ABC's a corporation.
Oh, they just bought 2020
That's what I heard.
Disney and Warren Buffett owns 21%.
Yeah.
of the whole ABC.
Because it's the corporation.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so let's start again on that.
Okay.
Disney's.
Okay. Disney has purchased 2020, and from the investigation that has ensued with many mind control and sexual abuse victims, many of the kids were traumatized at the Disney World locations. This came about at the same time that my story was killed and being held hostage at ABC. One has to wonder if this is related and connected, since it's all about abusing and sexually abusing and mentally abusing and physically abusing children.
At the highest level.
At the highest levels in our country. That's going to work?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can slice it in enough to where...
Well, I know you're going to be dissecting it a lot.
They spent an hour editing.
Oh, I know. That's a big job to edit.
Biology class revisited.
It makes me...
I haven't interviewed him yet.
I know.
I'm going to interview him.
I knew somebody should have just had a TV camera.
Do you want to turn that off now?
Oh, he likes to get all this candid stuff.
That's right.
No.
That was when you were in the Senate investigating.
My very first investigator, Denny Whalen, went
Okay,
to
go ahead.
one of the auctions.
Cover that.
Early in the Johnny's investigation, shortly after I had hired Denny Whalen, who was a private investigator, he came to me and he said that he had learned that there were auctions of children that were taking place throughout the country, and that he had someone that could get him into the auction as a buyer, but he would need the financial backing that if Johnny came across the auction block that night, that he could buy him back for us, and the only thing we would be able to say to the authorities was that we paid a private ransom. So we arranged for financing by taking a second mortgage on our house so that we had the cash available. He went to the auction. That particular one was held near Houston, Texas. Johnny did not go across the auction block that night, but Denny Whalen described to us when he got back that there had been 26 boys all marched across a stage-like area, all wearing nothing but their underwear, and they had a number hung around their neck on a string, and that each child was brought up and auctioned and then taken away. There were foreign buyers there from other countries and left that night with an American child.
And did anybody else tell you about auctions? Any place else?
No, only
Did Johnny mention auctions when he came home that
he
time?
didn't talk about the auction.
Oh, at the investigating hearing you were at when you seen the catalogs.
Say that again.
The Senate investigating hearings you were at where they had everything spread on the table.
Oh yeah, with the FBI, and the FBI covered it up. Okay, good.
In August of 1984, when I testified before the organized crime hearings in Washington, D.C., I presented information about Johnny's kidnapping and the auctions that took place. Kenneth Lanning with the FBI also presented that day, and he also displayed on a conference table about 6 foot long all the paraphernalia that was seized during the arrest of a pedophile. One of the items that was seized was a catalog filled with pictures of children that had not yet been kidnapped. I asked for a copy of it, and I was told that I could not have that. The Washington Press Corps was there in full force. They filmed all of us. They filmed the table with the paraphernalia, and they filmed the picture of the catalog. It was reported in the Washington Press the next day. In subsequent interviews, Kenneth Lanning now has denied that that catalog ever existed, and he denied saying that he ever testified to that fact, and he has in fact called me a liar.
Don't feel bad. He's said some nasty things about me too. George, you got any other?
Yeah, but who hasn't?
Rusty. They're traveling with a
See,
little...
listen to see what George
I'm
thinks.
thinking that I don't know for sure what you've done.
Guess what they have out in the car? A black cat.
I brought my one pussycat.
Well, we covered just, I think, just about everything we talked about at lunch, didn't we? Yeah, I think we did.
Those were good that you brought up, though, because we had missed them.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need another
Have you
job.
mentioned anything? I know you probably said something about the book, but have you mentioned that there's probably been 60 or 100 more victims that have read your book come forward by email?
Yeah. People that have contacted you.
Come forward by email to verify if you're saying in there, and that are still looking for help and know where to go.
Okay, go. That's That's good. Go ahead.
Since the time that my book has come out, which was just a year ago, the amount of victims that have contacted me through emails or letters or phone calls, victims of this same sexual abuse and the mind control, wanting help, not knowing where to turn, the memories of what they have experienced are coming back to them. They feel isolated and afraid and want to know where they should go, what they should do to try and bring their lives back together. Many of them are about the same age as my son is today. Some are older. This crime has existed for many, many decades. It is nothing new. They have been so sophisticated in the way that they have orchestrated this type of crime and to the level that they have in this country that the average citizen finds it not only difficult but impossible to believe that it could ever happen.
Any other thoughts? Points? How many of these victims?
We've had about 66 or 68 contact us since the book came out.
Are these what you call survivors?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Some, a lot.
Do you have their names?
Some of them I do still have their names. Some of them didn't ever want the names go publicly. Some of the names I gave to Ellen and Sue just as a point for somebody to contact to or contact with. And both Ellen and Sue told me that they had such a full plate in their life they didn't want to talk to them.
Yeah,
So,
what we really need to do with those names is
gather them up.
Gather them up and let them network with each other and then help each other on their own research. That's what I do when
Yeah.
they call me.
Yeah.
I receive a lot of calls like that too.
We're trying to get maybe some type of a chat area or chat room on the website
Mm-hmm.
that would be for victims to go into.
Yeah.
The problem with that is you get all kinds of people who get into it.
Yeah, true.
Weirdos.
And it's got to be monitored somehow or
Well, when they call me, I just put them in direct touch with each other by phone or by email, whatever they have.
Yeah.
And I have a drawer that is nothing but survivors. So if you can get those to me, I'd like to have them.
Okay. Most of what I've received, the major portion of them were emails.
Yeah, that's all right. Any way that at least I'll have a.
In fact, there's one gal that's right outside of Seattle that writes to me quite often. She's had a horrible life. Terrible
Yeah.
life.
Well, I just have them all in one place. I don't know if I'll ever use them or not or be able to help them, but eventually maybe we will,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Anything else, George, you can think of? Rusty, anything you can think of? I was just kidding about you not listening.
Think. Wish me luck.
Paul told me about it. They were auctioning kids off in Toronto, Canada, and also Las Vegas.
I had heard about Toronto and Las Vegas through Paul, but I didn't know about the place outside.
And also, I've got the name of an investigator who attended. What's that?
I was in one of them at Las Vegas.
What were you brought there for?
I was brought in with Larry. I didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Mhm.
Larry flew into this one. And as far as I can tell from going back, it's up by Area 51.
It was where?
It's up by Area 51.
Oh, by Roswell.
Yeah, no. Roswell's in New Mexico.
New Mexico.
This is up, was it north of Las Vegas?
Yeah, I read
Indian
it.
Springs and...
Indian Springs, I think it is. I
Were you
rented
just
it.
absolutely shocked when you got in there?
I was shocked, but I didn't dare say anything.
Oh, no.
You know,
How
they
many
were
kids did they auction that night?
what was there, about a dozen or so? It wasn't that
No, look
many.
at me. I
They
wasn't
don't
there.
have great big huge ones, about 20 kids at the most at a
Paul
time.
told me he's been to 6 auctions, and the number varied from 6 to 36.
Mhm.
And they were Toronto and Las Vegas. And then I have an investigator on another case who's been to Lincoln at the barn. And I had a tip on an auction at the barn one night, and I called John. He started going up and down the road. And I was told later by a source that the deputy sheriff's radio dispatcher is into the satanic movement. And then when the call went out, check on this barn, they dispersed the auction.
Mhm.
There's supposed to be a huge compound off of 80 West just west of Lincoln.
Yeah.
With surveillance cameras looking so they can see who's coming, armed guards into the garden gates and
Yeah.
some satanic type deal. But the lady in Connecticut was telling us about.
That's what
How far out east of Lincoln, or west of Lincoln?
it's the ways.
Well, she said it's just west of Lincoln before, and then once you get west of Lincoln, you got, what's that, Grand Black, you got nothing between there.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a hilly
Didn't you
area.
mention Norfolk? Or North?
North Platte.
North
Platte.
No, not North Platte. There's another town.
I've had survivors send me maps. You know, I'm a one-man army. I can't do
It's
anything.
huge, and it's the,
Yeah.
there's a big one in Pennsylvania, and
I've got the one in Pennsylvania. I've got a map of all that.
this one's in Nebraska, it's off I-80.
Yeah.
And there's even, somebody was telling us that the first rest area or something after Lincoln is the gathering point where they pick them up, take them, and then get from that rest area to the compound. They just drop them off on the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
Was the first one after, one of the rest areas right after
Yeah.
Lincoln was Sandy was telling us that. Gary found that out.
You're right, I did come from
Yeah.
Sandy.
She said that one of the rest areas there was a dropping point for...
It's big.
Yeah, you need to talk to Sandy.
Yeah. I think it was Sandy.
Let me get through this first. And my 3 books.
Well, not if you want some of her stuff for this tape, too.
Well,
Might
this is Sandy, isn't it?
Kira Dory.
Oh, I'm going to talk to Sandy, yeah. We'll talk to her in January.
Yeah.
Definitely going to talk to her.
At
Well,
this,
let's get out of these people's lives.
at this,
Hmm?
at this auction that you went to, did the kids, who were some of the buyers? Just
There was a Jewish guy, I think 3 or 4 Middle Easterners, and a couple American business people.
Was this in Lincoln?
Las Vegas.
Oh.
when they
Late
bought the kids, what were some of the prices they went for? Do you remember?
15 to 50,000 plus.
Were they all boys, or were they boys and girls, or?
It was mainly boys, but there were a couple girls in it that were, you know, a little bit older.
Were the kids all drugged into submission by that point?
From what I can tell you.
I mean, kind of a daze, so they didn't act out or try to get away or get bizarre.
Yeah.
We talked about it, you know.
A lot.
Everybody's talked about Aquino.
And the fact that his ex-wife or somebody's been, what's her name, Linda Blood's been calling and trying to...
We didn't talk about the fact that Linda's been calling me, or did call me asking me if I was sick yet. I don't know if you want to include that or not.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Be sitting over there.
Go ahead. She's a troublemaker, but, you know.
Oh, she is.
Okay.
Prior to my book being finished, and then shortly after it came out, I started receiving phone calls from Linda Blood, who was reportedly a former girlfriend of Michael Aquino's. And the opening of each conversation was the same. She would always ask me how I was, and I'd say fine, and she would say, "Are you sure you're not sick yet?" And I would always say that I was fine, which I was. It used to concern me a great deal as to why she would ask me that question, except that I know that some of the people involved have ways to try and make someone else ill through a chemical or something like that introduced into their life. So I was sure that she was probably reporting any and all things that I said back to Michael Aquino. I have no way of proving that, but eventually the phone calls did stop, but I did receive quite a few for a period of time.
You have thoughts, George? Rusty, anything more?
I was just wondering when George was going to start hosting his own TV show.
As the world turns with Noreen Gosch.
As the world turned upside down from Noreen Gosch.
You don't have one of these, why Johnny can't come home, do you, from Lincoln?
I don't.
Let's steal one of these from you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I got mine at home.
I think mine's out in Oregon.
I got, well, you sent me an autographed copy. Thank you.
I knew there was something we had to remember. Noreen Gosch at book signing.
did you mention anything, and this may not even be relevant, but it would be relevant to the Franklin cover-up case, about when you went to New Governor Vilsack, who has hired Carrie's sister as our Department of Human Services, how he said it's a matter of public safety, not a matter for criminal investigation.
We went through that.
And by the way, folks, for an extra $50, I'm sure she'll autograph your copy too. It went up to $75. That's only if they get the video with it and you want
That's right. If you need a copy for anybody else, go ahead and take one out of the box.
The video or the book?
The
book.
The book.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
copy that out.
No, I'm gonna autograph one to my son and his wife, will you? Greg and Sue.
To Greg and Sue?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I appreciate it.
We gotta keep it.
Because he's the, I have 4 children, and he's the one kid that really knows what's going on. The others are in denial. To Greg and Sue.
Where do they live?
In New Jersey, South Jersey.
As you can see how Noreen Gosch spends her evenings nowadays. Now that she's a newlywed, she signs books. I guess that's what married life does to a person.
Good, thanks.
You're welcome.
Here's your notebook back.
George, who would you like
notes
yours
in
signed
there,
too?
Did Pam get one?
I don't know if she has.
Why don't you grab one for her? Because she might like to see a picture
Yeah,
of you
I
in
think
it.
so.
Huh?
Yeah, let's put the date on
She'll
it.
probably
Get it
have
in
it
there.
framed.
Put the date on
Rusty,
Wouldn't
could I
be the
use
first
your,
time you're friends.
could I use your pen again? I want to put
Of
the
course.
date on here. Do you want the date
Put,
on here?
Christmas, put December, I'll send this Christmas present, December 25. That's right. Even though you're not with them on that date, it'll be in the form of a Christmas present. Thank you.
Now, do you want today's date?
Yeah, might as well.
It's just 28th. 29th.
Yeah.
Did they ask you the question, what keeps you going, or why do you keep pushing forward? What's your objective?
That's a good
What are you
question.
trying to- Which could be asked of yourself,
That's a good question.
asked of Ted, asked of John DeCamp, asked
Yeah.
of all of you.
You know
Yeah.
what, that you could
Why
ask
are
each
you
one of
doing
us
this?
that
Why
same
not?
question, whether you use it or not.
That's a
But
very good question. Let's get her on camera.
Why are you sacrificing
Yeah.
your
Your
personal
life.
life?
Actually, let me pull up a
They
little
can ask the
closer
question,
here.
somebody could ask you them, I don't know, when you're asking questions, is it on the tape?
No.
Oh,
not yet.
No, I'm not,
not personal, I mean, your voice, as if you're the one interviewing her.
no. I'm staying off the table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
You ready?
I'm
Spoken like a true narcissist.
But I just want everybody to tell their story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that'd be a good question.
Okay.
to ask
Yeah, it's
John.
very good.
Many people ask me how I can keep going on after losing my son the way that I did. Or why do you keep going on? First of all, I'll answer the why. I keep going on because I love my son. And I feel very badly for what has happened to him and so many thousands of other children. If somebody doesn't rise up and say something and do something, it will continue to grow greater than it is already. If parents don't band together, those of us who've lost our children, and let the others know, then there'll be more victims. The old saying, the buck has to stop somewhere, or the buck stops here, is what I believe. They took the wrong kid when they took Johnny Gosch. How I keep going each day, I do it day by day. There are days that I go hour by hour. Some days are good days. But none of my days could ever be as bad as the days that my son has spent since he was ripped away from his home. And when I start to feel badly, when it starts to really tear at me, that's what I think about. That he is the true victim here, not me. I've had a terrible heartache, but I'm not the victim in this situation. It was a little 12-year-old boy that didn't do anything to anyone. And as long as I kind of jerk myself back by the collar, then I can straighten up and fly and make it to the next day and the next. And I thank God every day for my strength, mental and physical. And I'm very thankful for what I do have in my life, the people I have in my life that support me and love me and care.
Very good.
Yeah. Here's the one for Pam.
We'll have to take the glass out of it, though.
Noreen, do you have my summary? I wrote a summary up on the Franklin case.
Huh?
Years ago, I wrote a summary, came in, closing down.
Well, here's what happened. Wasn't Spotlight connected with the guy in
More
Warren?
copies or what's up?
But the gal in the office there told me that John Zelensky's been calling there a lot.
And Zelensky is.
And so I figured, well, if whoever he calls a lot, he goes into the whole story about. Over the past 20 years, I've seen a lot of different reactions to Johnny's kidnapping and the information surrounding missing children. Everything from disbelief to non-acceptance to the people who are the majority, which are the ones that are praying for you and wishing you well and cheering you on, because they know that what you're doing is trying to make a better system and a better, safer situation for their children. With the, what was the second point? I forgot the second.
The avenues you've been taking most recently. Yeah.
Okay. The most recent avenues I've been taking to get the word out is talk shows, radio talk shows, network television whenever that becomes available, and then speeches when they are also requested in different communities. I give speeches and have for schools, civic organizations, churches, anyone who is interested in knowing about missing children and making their own children safer. I also have taken to the internet. I have a website which is www.johnnygosch.com, and on there's a way to connect to me through email. I answer all emails that come in, and I also am going to continue with as much publicity as I can generate for the whole missing children's issue, because I think that it's one that is easily forgotten, not thought of as much as it should be, because it is such a horrific crime. It makes people very afraid for their own children, and the word needs to be kept out there, and we need to keep moving.
Maybe a little bit of how it appears that the American public is tuning away from the news made for television to talking, you know, directly talking to people over talk radio,
Okay.
where you're actually in person and talking to people over the phones, and there seems to be more of a conscious awareness of what's really going on.
Right.
And chat rooms, the internet, how much
There seems to be a different turn with people and the news. The made-for-television news is not as appealing as much anymore because of the hype, and people are turning to alternative news media sources, both on the internet and Talk Free America Radio, the programs that are not censored, where you get the real truth about what is happening in our country and in our world.
Question I have. From your lecture speeches, the book, and so forth, how many other parents of kidnapped victims have been in contact with you?
Over the long 20 years that Johnny's been missing, I have been contacted by hundreds of parents that have had missing and sexually abused children. In some cases, the children are dead, they've been murdered, and the bottom line is, the result is, neither one of us, none of us, have our children. And the things that they want from me range from how to run an investigation when the police don't help you, how do you continue to survive the terrible tragedy, keep your job, and keep the other members of your family flying straight. I am considering writing another book on coping techniques, because there are ways to cope that are hands-on techniques that give you something tangible. And that's what people need. Because when everything else in your world is turned upside down and you lose control of your world, that is when people become very frenzied, when others have complete control. And you can take some of that back in little ways, even though the kidnapper, the police, the press, may be the large players in your life. You can do little things to have that feeling of control and some measure of balance again.
And of the parents who have contacted you, parents of the victims, have they had the same experience with law enforcement that you have? In other words, have some of them, all of them, a majority of them? What percentage?
The majority of the parents that have contacted me some have had difficulty with the police and law enforcement in the very beginning of their cases. Some have had cooperation in the beginning, and then it has turned sour, where the law enforcement either got tired of running leads or put the cases on the back burner and do not work them. And the parents then have nowhere to go. They don't know what to do. And a lot of people are not equipped financially to hire a private investigator. It's very costly. And so in that case, I give the parents ideas on how to do fundraisers to raise the money to get a good detective on the case. Because the key is you have to have somebody looking, somebody working the case.
Have they had the same experience, or what percentage have had the same experience as you with the FBI?
At this point in time, I have yet to have one set of parents tell me that the experience with the FBI has been a good one. The FBI has taken a very lax attitude towards missing children. It was not as important as it should have been. And evidence of that was when the racehorse, the prize-winning racehorse, Fran Ferluc, was missing. Someone had stolen it. And they gave attention to that and refused to work on Adam Walsh's case. And John Walsh cited that when we were at the Justice Department and testified, and he cited